Soon. Thanks again for staying with us, and thank you for inviting us into your homes. And yes, we've changed locations, a little posh this morning. We're here at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, and the reason we're coming to you live this morning, AmCham is hosting its 16th annual Health, Safety, Security, Environment Conference and Exhibition. It's a two-day event, and it's been happening for over 16, well, this is its 16th year. Joining us on set now, Eugene Tia, a former president of AmCham, but he's still a board member attached to many of the activities that AmCham has been doing over the past year or so. Mr. Tia, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you champion the cause of this committee, and you champion the reason for having this event and all that's happening.
Yes.
16 years. How has it progressed? How has it changed?
I've been associated with it for more than 16 years. Phoenix Park, the business that I'm involved with,
right,
has been a member of AmCham for 20 years, since its inception. So over the 16 years, I've seen it grow from a very small conference with big ambitions to now a world-class conference. I must mention that when one compares this conference with any conference, international conference, there's very little distinction. Over the years, AmCham have been able to get this conference up to a world-class standard. You'd see from the list of speakers,
right,
and the topics that is no different than any conference, any part of the world, any premier conference in this area.
Now, looking at it as it's positioned itself as a premier conference, is it only Trinidad and Tobago specific? Do we have regional attendees as well, or is that something that you're looking at?
No, the ambition is to have regional attendees. The financial situation regionally has created some drag and created some challenge. But the ambition really is for it to be a regional conference where the knowledge in the HSSE arena is shared broadly. The intent is to enable businesses, in particular government agencies, etc., to improve their performance in these areas and enhance the performance of their business overall.
Enable agencies, government agencies, it's interesting that you make that comparison. The budget is going to be delivered on Monday.
Yes.
Making sure that businesses are HSSE compliant. The OSH legislation has been around for quite a while. We're hoping to build on that, yet there seems to be a gap with what was expected, the results, actual implementation, and now we're hoping to take it the next step forward. How are we going to do all of that? Well,
I mean, this conference is an ideal opportunity to equip professionals with the knowledge, the skills, etc., and the networks, more importantly, the networks, to be able to achieve those objectives. I mean, ultimately, it depends on the leadership and the commitment of leadership. And I think therein lies the challenge that we face. People talk the talk, but don't necessarily walk the talk. And I think that's a challenge that we face not only in the HSSE arena, but in other arenas within the country.
Tying HSSE, the environment and sustainable development, this year Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the feature speaker.
Yes.
He's done a lot of work in the environment and linking that to sustainable development.
Yes.
Industry compliance, understanding the implications, and also enforcement. How far behind are we?
Well, I think, one, of course, at least from our perspective, my perspective, I think there's a distinction between commitment and compliance. Ultimately, commitment is a much more sustainable and a higher standard. Unfortunately, we have to drive things through compliance. We have the legislation, we have operationalized legislation. The challenge, of course, is always having the resources available to do the necessary audits and checks and so, and then to be willing to go further to enforce compliance through the application of penalties and fines and what have you.
These audits are done externally, or is it internally?
Well, audits are typically done, organizations do their own audits.
Right.
But from a regulatory standpoint, the regulators typically would also do their independent audits.
Has that been happening?
Well, speaking about the Phoenix Park business, and which I'm involved with, we've been audited a few times by the OSH Authority.
Do you think it's a little unfair that the OSH Authority seems to concentrate a lot on the Point Lisas industrial estate and also those in the energy industry, not understanding that each business must ensure that the policies and procedures are in place?
Yeah, I don't know the statistics, so I can't attest for the
any bias
veracity of that statement. However, However, what I do know is if one approaches it from a risk standpoint, one would have to consider the nature of the hazards and so on, then direct one's effort. So if one has a limited resource, one may focus in a particular area. But I do take your point. We have other sectors that we hear about the prevalence of safety situations, the construction sector, for example. And I do hope that the construction sector is really going to be very active and participate in this conference.
Now, looking at the other sectors, and that would have been my question to you, about attendance. I know that a number of the big entities are affiliated with this, ArcelorMittal and Atlantic LNG, pt4, the pt4 and Yara. Most of them are in the same industry. The appeal to manufacturing service.
Well, I'm glad you raised that point. Over the years, 16 years we've been having this conference, a lot of effort has been expended to get these other sectors very active and involved. The reality, as you've defined from the statistics, that the energy sector still dominates this conference in terms of participation and support. We really want, and I would throw out the challenge to the manufacturing sector, to the construction sector, and to other sectors, that they need to get involved in conferences like this. They need to expose their professionals to where cutting-edge practices are so that they could improve the performance of their organizations.
Occupational safety, a number of mini conferences and panel discussions are taking place. Environmental panel discussion, human, economic and environmental progress, practical applications to achieve balance. Is balance even possible?
I do think so. I mean, I could speak for my own business, for example. We have been able over the years to attain world-class standards in safety performance. We right now have the national benchmark. We've gone 20 years in business without a lost workday case. 10 years ago, someone looking at that statistic would have said that was impossible to achieve. On the other hand, we have very good economic performance. So it's clear to me that focus on these areas within the business makes good business sense.
Right. Now, looking at the environment with the budgets specifically, what are you hoping to see?
Well, I mean, there are challenges, as you recognize. They're visible. We still see the incidents of beverage containers littering the waterways. We still have beach cleanup campaigns where after a holiday weekend, there's a lot of solid waste trash and so that is deposited on the beaches. We have issues with dumping in rivers and streams that cause flooding problems. So we have a long way to go from my perspective in terms of getting the population focused on good environmental stewardship.
Good environmental stewardship. And tying all of this into sustainable development, Robert F. Kennedy has written a number of pieces, whether it be some of his books or papers and studies. Do you think we understand that link?
Well, I mean, if you think about, and I'm not suggesting that some of the flooding that we're having is only attributable to deposition of trash and so in the causeways, but if one were to quantify that and think about possibly the hundreds of millions of dollars in remediation work that has to be done, couldn't that money have been put to better use? So I think that with regard to sustainable development, it's very clear the linkage between poor environmental stewardship and high additional costs arising out of flooding-related events, cleanup efforts. Think about the effort it takes to get 100 people mobilized to clean up a beach, when if all of the people that attended their celebrations and so at the beach were to clean up their trash and to just put it in the bin, the resources that get focused on those things could be deployed in other areas.
Business continuity and crisis management. After an event, whether it be a fatality, an explosion, any sort of disaster happening, most times some people are a little skeptical. Crisis management simply is PR management. Do you think that enough is being done to monitor, to ensure that accidents do not reoccur?
Well, I'm not sure if the effort that is required for disaster management, business continuity is where it needs to be locally. I know we have the ODPM, and they seem to be doing pretty good work. But the acid test is really being able to sustain a proper recovery effort, or to have in place a proper recovery effort after a major event. We have been fortunate in that we're just south of where the hurricanes hit, and that probably has been a blessing for us. But the situations that we're seeing with changing in weather patterns and the severe weather situations that we've been having, even the number of industries that we have and the risk profile of the country, clearly, from my perspective, a lot more needs to be done with regard to the disaster recovery and business continuity.